Okay, and we are coming back. So thank you all for sticking with us. Up next, we have Kim Arcand, who's going to tell us a bit about Chandra accessibility. So, Kim, the floor is yours whenever you are ready.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Caitlin. I really appreciate it. Let me just share my screen. Mm,
We can see everything.
Wonderful. Okay. So, hi, everybody. My name is Kim Arcand. My pronouns are she, her, and I am very pale with blonde hair. And today I'm wearing a green sweater. Behind me in my virtual background is one of my very favorite exploded stars called Cassiopeia A, which I will be talking about today. So, my talk is titled An Accessible Universe from Sight to Sound to Touch. And I am the visualization scientist for NASA's Chandra Observatory. I'm situated at the Center for Astrophysics. Today, I am zooming in from a very, very stormy Rhode Island. If I tend to look away a few times, it's just because I'm afraid a tree might fall on my house during some of these very, very gusty winds. So, without further ado, I wanted to start just by talking about my background. I come from a biology and computer science background, and I've always sort of been fascinated with this idea that all of the data that we get of the universe is just a collection of ones and zeros, right? When we get that information, it is essentially just a suitcase of binary code that we then have to unpack and do something interesting with in order to visualize it, or as my dear colleague Gwen mentions, vivify it. And so for the first 10 years or so of my career working for NASA's Chandra Observatory, I was really concentrating on this idea of how to take images of our universe, particularly images that are in X-ray light, which no human can naturally see, and translating them into an image that we can see. And there was a lot of research and work that had to go into that process of understanding how to visualize our high energy universe. But it really sort of left me feeling like there was something wanting. Being just concentrating on visuals just made me feel like I was really not doing my job in taking the universe and making it more accessible to everyone. And what changed for me is back in about 2008. We started working with another scientist, Dr. Tracy Delaney, who was at MIT at the time, to be able to take that data of an exploded star that I mentioned, Cassiopeia A, the remains of a star after it collapsed in on itself and exploded its guts out all over the universe, and created this beautiful sort of spherical blob, if you will, of this hot gas and dust. And when we were working with Tracy Delaney, she was trying to figure out which of that light from that exploded star was moving away from us and which of that light was moving towards us. And we used some software, some medical imaging software, to be able to create the very first 3D remnant of that exploded star using actual NASA observational data. So data that we had captured with our NASA telescopes like Chandra and a couple other telescopes as well. And once we had that 3D model, it really occurred to me that we could do an awful lot with it. So our next step in that journey of moving from just a plain visual image to something more was taking that and working with our colleagues at the Smithsonian, who had recently 3D printed President Obama's head, and learning from them how to do 3D printing. And so we held our very first version of this exploded star in our hand. And the image on my screen now is a sort of a clumpy model of this exploded star, this sort of spherical shape with these kind of green globules stuck on the side that are these high energy jets. And so taking that 3D model that we had of that exploded star and 3D printing it so we could hold a very tiny, tiny, tiny version of it in our hands was a really just exceptional moment for me, that there was a lot more to this data that we could do with it, a lot more that we could make of it, a lot more real accurate and really exciting stories that we could tell with it. So once we had that 3D print, it sort of occurred to me, well, what else can we do with this type of material? And so we started working with some of our colleagues in communities of people who are blind or visually impaired to be able to figure out how these models could be improved and what use we could make out of them. And eventually we started working with the National Federation of the Blind and their Summer Youth Slam program. And we took a few of these models that we had been developing and these 3D prints and brought them to a class of very talented students. And within about 5 minutes of working with them, we realized how many more amazing things we could be doing. We learned a ton of lessons on how to take that data and make it even more accessible and even more exciting. And we eventually took those 3D models, those 3D prints, and created a kit of stellar evolution, a kit that sort of helps describe the life journey of a star. And so on my screen now, I just have a few sort of lessons learned that we've been able to glean from working with our various colleagues that are either blind or low vision. And those lessons learned probably seem a little obvious, but are great to be able to sort of narrow down and really put a pin in. And size, really, the bigger the size, the better it was for handling. It gave a lot more attention to detail. Resolution of those 3D prints was really important as well. The more smoother and the more accurate that we could provide, the better and more improved information processing that could be done. Quality was very important, make sure they were strong, reinforcing jets, reinforcing joints, making sure there weren't any weak areas, for example, but also access. So if we had a spherical model, like my good friend Cassiopeia A, we could take it and cut it in half. So the internal information could be accessed just like the external information. And as simple as that sounds, that was a true revelation. It really helped make all of this content much more accessible for everybody. And so we had this exploded star that we could take apart and then put back together with magnets, and it just made it interactive and accessible and fun. Quantity was also a thing. The students and our colleagues just wanted more of these models, more of these content. And overall, I think we just learned a very obvious lesson that universal design helps more users. It really helps many more people get engaged with the content. So on my screen now, I just have a picture of one of these 3D prints of my very good friend Cassiopeia A, that exploded star. And this is the version that has been cut in half. And I have to apologize if anyone's seeing my cat. My cat, no fail, every time I sit down to give a talk, must come across my lap. Anyways, so these 3D models, we really learned an awful lot with them. And we developed this kit, as I mentioned. This kit we tested with a number of organizations, the International Astronomical Union, for example, a bunch of NASA centers, and a few other community-based organizations as well. So if anyone is interested in procuring one of these 3D printed kits, for example, please feel free to email me. I'll put my email in chat and mention at the end. You can also take a look or learn more about these kits on our website at chandra.si.edu/tactile. So I'd been very happy of this 3D work that we had been doing for quite a few years. And the idea of not being able to do this physical, tactile, in-person work during the pandemic was really distressing to me. I just really did not like the idea of losing connection with our community members that had done so much work to really make these kits successful. And I started working with a colleague, Matt Russo from System Sounds, and his colleague, Andrew Santaguida, to be able to take information and then translate it into sound. So being able to stay in that digital realm so that during the pandemic, when we couldn't be in a room with someone, when we couldn't be handling the same material tactilely, that we would still have a way to be able to make our data accessible. And so the idea of sonification, which I think a lot of people have talked about today in various talks, is this idea of taking information and translating it into sound. So it's not the idea that we're capturing sound of these objects as they are in space, but that we're taking that data, that suitcase that I mentioned of binary code, and instead of just translating it into an image, we're then taking that image and translating it into a sound-based experience so that you can really experience that data in a new way. And I'm going to play through a few different examples of these sonifications for you now. And I just like to describe what I'll be playing so that you can sort of situate where I'm going to go with this. The first piece that I'm going to play, it's about 4 or 5 different components of the M51 galaxy. The M51, or the Whirlpool galaxy, is a spiral shaped galaxy, kind of like our own Milky Way. And it has these beautiful structures of spiral arms where the edges of those arms are quite fuzzy, kind of like tracks in snow would make, where the edges are very sort of blobby and fuzzy and not at all straight. And these arms I'm going to be showing are across a few different kinds of light. I'm going to start with X-ray light, and then I'm going to go up in scale until we get to the ultraviolet light, the radio light, the infrared light, and the optical light. And so this piece that I'm going to play for you is a radar scan of those spiral arms that I mentioned. The loudness of the piece is determined by the brightness in the image, and the pitches are determined by the distance from the center, with the light farther from the center heard as higher pitched notes from a certain scale. So hopefully you'll all be able to hear the sound as I play them. This first piece is the Whirlpool galaxy in X-ray light as it's been sonified. And here we go. So what we just listened to, that X-ray layer, it's the highest energy material of the Whirlpool galaxy. And the shape is like these, purples and whites, all of these little clumps and little bright spots that you're seeing in the image or that are located in the image are really superheated energetic sources, things like exploding stars, things like two stars dancing together, things like black holes, and all sorts of other really exciting material. And so that is played as the highest pitch material. Now, the second piece that I'm going to play, it's the exact same field of view, the same portion of our Whirlpool galaxy. This is a galaxy that's millions of light years away from us, where, for example, a light year is the distance that light travels in a year, or about 10 trillion kilometers. And this is about 30 million light years away. So now we're going to listen to that same field of view in the ultraviolet light. The image that we're looking at is now like these bluer, softer, sort of fuzzier blobs throughout that sort of very gentle spiral kind of S shape. And here we are listening to how it sounds when we translate that data. So now those sounds are in a slightly lower tone than what we just heard with the X-ray, and the lower energy material in that ultraviolet capture is a little bit softer. It's a little bit fuzzier and a little bit blobbier, if you will. Now we're going to listen to the same field of view again of our good friend, the Whirlpool galaxy, and we're going to be listening to it in optical light from NASA's Hubble Space Telescope. In the image, the optical image, which is colored green for our purposes, it's a much clearer view of the sort of dusty and wispy, kind of veiny looking arms that spiral around the bright source in the center. And this is a lower tone that you'll hear as it scans around. And so that sound is a much more, it's a lower sound, but also has a more like of a piano underneath that sort of choral sound of voices. And our next layer, our next layer is the lowest energy layer. This is the infrared light that we'll be listening to. And the image now is colored red. And unlike the previous image of optical light, this is now a little bit more out of focus. And we're looking at really the cool gas and dust that are making up those very sort of soft and gentle spiral shaped arms. And so this will be the lowest sounds of material that you'll be listening to. Okay, and so we've just heard those sort of cool dust lanes that are through those arms of that beautiful spiral galaxy. And now we're going to hear the sort of symphony, if you will, of all of those pieces, all of those different kinds of light combined into one. So what's really great about astronomy is when you have all of these different kinds of light, each different kind of light is like a different tool in your tool belt, and you're learning something different about that object in each different kind of light. And so now when you're hearing all of those pieces together, it sort of makes this little mini symphony, and you can hear the very busyness, the sort of downtown region around the core. You can hear how strong those spiral arms are. You can hear all of this activity from the lowest energy material all the way up to the highest energy material. So here's what this little mini symphony of our good friend, the Whirlpool Galaxy, sounds like. So we created this project with the idea of being able to take data and translate it into sound. And really, I think I did not have much of an expectation for how the project would be received. And I was really, truly blown away. I will have some information on that on my next slide. I just wanted to share one more example of the sonifications that we've been working on for the past year and a half-ish, I guess I'd say. And this last one is just a sea of dots is what the image looks like. It is a patch of sky that's called the Chandra Deep Field South, and it's a very dark patch of sky that we pointed Chandra to look at with its X-ray vision for quite a long amount of time, for days and days on end. And when we looked at the data, it sort of looked like somebody's thrown some colorful confetti all over a black canvas. And it's just these multicolored dots. So it's not the most visually arresting image, perhaps, but scientifically, it's just chock full of all of this science goodness. And I never really thought this image really spoke to all of that wealth of scientific information that's tucked inside those pixels, those ones and zeros underneath it all. And so the sonification, I think, was really a way for us to be able to pull apart some of that sciencey goodness. And so now what you're going to be listening to is you're going to be listening to a scan from the very top, from the very bottom of the image up to the top. The image itself is essentially a field of lots of black holes and galaxies that are very far, far, far away, billions upon billions of light years away from us, some of the farthest things that we can actually observe in X-ray light. And you're essentially going to be listening to thousands of black holes. So these black holes and these far distant galaxies have been color coded by energy, with the lowest energy X-ray being assigned to the lowest notes and the highest energy X-rays being assigned to the highest notes. So here is what a field of thousands of galaxies sounds like when we translate that image into sound. that is what a field of about 5,000 black holes can sound like when we take the information and translate it into sound. To me, the sonification tells a very rich story that the image kind of lacks a little. And that sound has a sort of softer, sort of comforting sound to me. If there are any Imogen Heap fans here, it kind of reminds me of some of her music as well. And it was really surprising to me how truly beautiful it was. So, as I mentioned previously, I was really surprised by the response. We had truly created these sonifications with our colleagues who are either blind or low vision in mind. We had done testing both with some astrophysicists who are blind or low vision and also some students that we've worked with to make sure the meaning making of those sonifications was acceptable and that they were pleasing to listen to. And then, yeah, they went viral, and we had like over 1.5 million listens on NASA's SoundCloud within the first weeks. We had news coverage and just very high levels of engagement on social and digital platforms. It was a very popular feature on our website. And so I thought it would be worth it to do a survey research study on how people were perceiving this information, how people were responding to these pieces of sound across the expert and the non-expert spectrum with BVI communities, people who are blind or low vision, as well as not. And we had about 4,500 responses from the survey, including people who said that this was the most fun survey I ever took, which I thought was amazing until I realized, well, the other surveys might be like really boring Home Depot surveys. Who knows? So who knows what that response is? But overall, there was a lot of learning gains that were shown for both groups. There was high enjoyment levels that were obvious for both groups. It was very statistically significant to see that. And also what was interesting that popped up was that learning about access for others and how other people can access information of the universe had a large significant response as well in the non-BVI group, so people who had sight. And that was really interesting to see. And I'm still finishing up on the analysis of that data, but it's been really, really wonderful to be able to have all those responses. So that overall response to the sonification program and the earlier response to the 3D printed program really encouraged us to keep going and to keep trying new things and to just keep learning more about how people respond and experience data of our universe, especially the high energy universe where things like quasars, blazars, magnetars, and pulsars, these objects that sound like they're from science fiction but are science fact, where they tend to hold sway. So we've been working with some of my students at Brown University to create a sonification and haptification app where you can upload images of our universe or whatever else and be able to sonify them with a very simple sound, and then also get the haptic or vibrational response from your smartphone or other device of choice. And in addition, we've also started incorporating, the previous slide, by the way, just showed a very brief screenshot of what that software looks like. And then we've also been working with our virtual reality applications to be able to build spatial sound as well as that haptic response or that vibrational response into them as well. And so on my screen now is just a short video capture of my good friend, the exploded star Cassiopeia A, and how we can build that star by layer in augmented reality, and then also attach sound or haptic response to it. So I was really happy with the results of those projects, but one thing that felt like it was missing was this idea of, we have all of these visuals that we've been creating for Chandra for literally 2 decades, since Chandra was launched back in 1999. And I really felt like we were still not doing a good job of trying to be able to make those visuals accessible. The visuals are one of the main sort of outputs from the observatory and the public space. And it really felt disingenuous as someone who's paid by federal taxpayers to make everything I do accessible. I want everybody to have that same seat in the cathedral of the universe that I have. And what else could we do to be able to really improve access to that data? So we started a project with some very close colleagues as well, JJ Hunt and Christine Malik, who run a very successful podcast, talk description to me. And we started creating these verbal descriptions of our high energy astrophysics data in real time as each image is released. So whether it's an image or a video, a time-lapse movie, a sonification, or an illustration of something that we can't visualize any other way, we provide this very detailed verbal description in text and audio formats. We use that material as alt text and metadata. We changed the audio recordings and formatted them into a podcast feed thanks to user feedback, and tried to create this package that was very responsive. And so the last thing I wanted to do was just provide an example of how we're doing that verbal description program. I'm just going to read a description of one of our recent pieces on the Cat's Eye Nebula. And this is how the verbal description reads. It says, the Cat's Eye video features a static image of an ethereal shape surrounded by concentric circles. The shape is the Cat's Eye Nebula, a huge cloud of gas and dust blown off of a dying star. The concentric circles are bubbles expelled by the star over time, and that dust cloud resembles a translucent pastry pulled to golden yellow points near our upper right and our lower left, with a blob of bright purple jelly inside the bulbous pale blue core. The jelly-like center represents X-ray data from Chandra, and the outer cloud and translucent circles represent visible light from the Hubble Space Telescope. So that's just an example of one of the visual descriptions that we created with the team. And really, there were two things that became clear when we were trying to figure out how to do these visual descriptions of these high energy astrophysics objects. And one of the first issues that we found was that describing the image in a visual way without encapsulating it in its scientific story was really not helpful. It was unsatisfying for people who are blind or low vision. So the approach that we settled on was an integration of those two things. So we had multiple strands of hair that we were sort of braiding together that scientific explanation with the descriptive visuals to really give a picture of what it was. And then our second thing that we really determined is that the style of that visual description is extremely important. So for a non-scientist, talking about some of these things like quasars and blazars could be very complicated. So having a very specific style that keeps the sentence structure short, really reduces the use of special proper names and keeps things very specific, really helped not only the sort of visual mental mapping of that information, but also help things with like screen readers. And so we found really that we're quite happy with how this program is going. The way that we've been creating our materials has been helping us improve and has been informing how other materials that we create for the Chandra Observatory are done. It's been improving our search engine optimization. We've been using these alt texts in our social media, in our HTML tagging, in our metadata for the images. And it's really been just so impressive to see how many ripples in that pond that one little drop of a nugget has occurred. So just a quick shout out to the teams that have been involved. As I mentioned, the visual description team with JJ, Christine, myself, and also Dr. Peter Edmonds and a few of our colleagues, the sonification team that I mentioned earlier. All of this work is really built on the shoulders of many other people who have studied these things even before us. And the 3D spatial and sonification teams with my students at Brown University, ranging from Elaine Jiang and Alex Stewart to Alex Dupuis, Ashley Chang, Holly Zhang, and quite a few other people. So I just want to say my thanks to them and also to this conference for having me here to be able to talk about it. So I'm happy to put a few of the URLs that I mentioned in the chat as well as my email. Please do feel free to contact me if you have questions on any of these programs that we're creating. And I really, really do welcome user feedback as well if you have anything like that to share. So my email is kkowal@cfa.harvard.edu. And hopefully I did okay on time, but let me see.
We
How'd I
are
do?
1 minute past. So
Okay, not
unfortunately,
awful.
we're not going to have time for questions. However, if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to contact. I'm assuming it's fine if people contact you at your email with
Absolutely.
questions.
Very
Yes.
much.
Okay. Wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank
That
you.
was a wonderful presentation. I absolutely loved the audio and the visuals. Absolutely beautiful videos there. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks.